Hey everyone, welcome to Quick Served. My man JW in with us, just reacting to the news that Stefano Vukov, who is the coach, and now the investigation is telling us that it is also the partner, boyfriend. I think we can feel comfortable saying that because they wrote it in an investigation that there is a personal relationship outside of the coaching dynamic. He is suspended for a year from the WTA Tour as a coach for breaking the WTA's Code of Conduct. Now, I'm always kind of reticent to talk about something that isn't 100% true, right? I don't like to say that they are involved personally until it's written into an investigation and has been vetted and sourced and all of those things that, we should do. But now, we can make judgments. The WTA Tour has found enough evidence of wrongdoing to suspend him for a year. And it seems like Australia set precedent with saying we are going to honor your rules. They certainly were not going to make available to him a credential at the Australian Open, even though all reports say that he was there with Rybakina, but just couldn't have access to any of the coaching areas. This is strange because the timeline with and I'm going to intermix the timeline with the facts that have been reported in this released information from the investigation today. So there have been rumors for years that this has kind of been a toxic relationship. There have been a lot of commentators who have sat near Vukov during matches and said, the way he operates is kind of, right there at the line of verbal abuse. And that's what we can see. And that's what he's willing to do in front of, thousands of people in a crowd. I think there was a collective sigh of relief. There was a lot of pullouts where it's like, at the US Open last year, everything was fine. First round, she wins 1-1 and then pulls out of the tournament. And it seemed like that was the least surprising part of it, was that the pullouts were kind of surprising always, right? Like it was inconsistent. And anyway, so they reportedly split, at least with their coaching relationship. The investigation says that he broke the code of conduct by kept reaching out and doing those stuff. So, and then we all reacted pretty positively to Rybakina bringing Goran Ivanisevic on. It's like, great, clean slate, someone who's jovial, someone who has a sense of humor, someone who is kind of like that anti-toxic type of coach-player relationship. And then the reports come out that she releases something on social that says Vukov's back in my team. And apparently that was news to Goran Ivanisevic, which is like bonkers beyond bonkers for your coach not to know what's going on and read about it in news reports and on social media. Goran sticks out the Australian Open and says, nope, this situation is too weird for me. I'm out. Recently I hired Davide Sanguinetti, who I really like and have always gotten along with. JW, run us through this situation. It's messy. It's weird. By all accounts, they're still together, even though he's not allowed to coach. I don't know what's going on. This just feels weird all around.
It's weird. It's disturbing. It's very hard to report on and talk about for the reasons that you mentioned. I mean, I think one element that we ought to point out is that she has adamantly, at least publicly, but I've heard privately too, she has adamantly denied that there's an issue here. So you have this very disturbing set of allegations. You're right. This has been brewing for years. I mean, I was told years ago that the WTA sometimes sent minders to her matches because they wanted to monitor just how harsh this abuse or this coaching was. An investigation was commenced after a report was made. I was told that was in conjunction with Cincinnati. You mentioned her pullout from the US Open. And I think one thing, just to fast forward, one thing that came out of what was released and reported on by Matt Futterman and Charlie Eccleshare was that there was this link between the coaching and coaching that went beyond the bounds in these withdrawals. So this was, at some level, there was a causal relationship. There was sort of cause and effect between this very intense coaching and the withdrawals that we've talked about. But it's really messy, not least because the player herself has said there's nothing to see here. There was a headline today that said Rybakina breaks her silence, and you sort of clickbait, what is that? And her silence was basically, I'm disappointed by this outcome. What more can I say? So she has not portrayed herself as a victim. And the fact that you have a player who basically is taking issue with this entire investigation apparatus, that's sort of an added element to this. It's all really upsetting and disturbing. If you read the report, I think it's pretty obvious this is pretty outrageous behavior. I do think that there are larger issues here, and I don't know if you want to get into that. I don't know if a player, you have strong opinions about that, but I do think it's a very interesting dynamic with the tour and what are the limits of what a tour can do. And there's a code of conduct. Everyone has to abide by it. Where do we draw lines there? We talk a lot about how players can't unionize because they're independent contractors. So they can't unionize, and yet the tour can sanction the coach that a player as an independent contractor has employed. I applaud the WTA. I think first and foremost, I don't think anyone's going to argue with this outcome. They will not confirm, by the way, that it is a year. I was told it is, and so that was the reporting also of Matt Futterman. But there was this provisional suspension. Now it's been converted into what I've been told is a year suspension. It's really messy business, especially because, as you referenced, there does seem to be a personal relationship that had long been rumored. Now that it's out there, I think we can talk about that as well, that there seems to be a romantic relationship between the player and this suspended coach. It's messy business. I haven't seen anything. I mean, maybe 20 years ago, there was a case of a coach who was banned for life, but this is not something you see often. It's a real statement by the WTA. I do think it opens the door. I mean, I do think there is a bit of a slippery slope here. I don't know, maybe that's something we punt on. Maybe that's something you have opinions on. It's not a pleasant situation. And honestly, you just hope she's okay. And someone at the WTA had a really interesting point to me a couple weeks ago. And they said, look, when we've had these situations in the past, how often is it that the player years later says, boy, I wish someone had intervened. It was pretty clear in retrospect that there was something dysfunctional and inappropriate. I wish people had jumped in. Versus how often do we hear a former player say, everybody jumped in and it was none of their business and we were doing fine. It's a lot more the former. And I think that may have been guiding some of this, even though this did not have the cooperation of the alleged victim. Rybakina was not, she was not someone who was speaking out against this coach. Quite the contrary. I think the WTA said, listen, we have an obligation. We have a duty to make sure that this is a safe workspace. Even if she is cooperating, we're not building a criminal case here where we have to hit this, we have to hit a threshold. We are going to make this decision despite the players protesting, and this guy needs to be banned. So that's where we are. I think there are a lot of angles to this. I think, top line is we hope she is okay and emerges from this okay. She's a grown woman. She has agency. She has choice. She can hire whoever she wants. She can sleep with whoever she wants. But read that report. I would urge people to read the reporting of Matt Futterman and Charlie Eccleshare. It's really disturbing. This is not just, hey, the coach got in her face and every coach is different. This really crossed a line. I just think it's a little bit problematic that the player herself does not seem to be on board with this. Quite the contrary. What do you think?
Yeah, and I was going to make the point that you made, that there have been examples, and whether it's been a father figure who's been abusive and the player saying, no, they're not, and then later saying they are. Obviously, that's different than someone who's 25 and, as you say, has agency. I think of Patty Schneider back in the day with whatever that nut job was, saying everything's okay, and then later saying it obviously wasn't. There are more examples that I'm not going to get into because it involves girls who were younger age, not on a personal level, but with a father or coach, and there are these tough, you would call it abusive relationships, and obviously they're scared to say anything. But this is it's just a strange situation because everything written in the investigation makes you just say, yuck, run away from this guy, right? But then it's everything you said also, where it's like, okay, we're independent contractors. Do they have the ability to say, you can't be around this person? We're going to make that decision for you on a professional level. And yet she can choose to be around this person in her own personal life. And I guess, all cards on the table, reading the report, reading the behavior of this guy, I want the WTA to have good standing to make this decision because I think it's the right decision. And also, it's just a tough thing to tell someone, an adult, a 25-year-old accomplished grown-up, that they can't do this, like, or that they can't have this person around at tournaments. And I guess the defense that I would try to provide if I was the WTA is, listen, she can decide if there's a dangerous relationship and she wants, or not wants to, but is choosing to be close to it, that's fine. But if this guy breaks the code of conduct, listen, we're not in locker rooms alone. We're not on practice courts alone. We're not in gyms alone. So maybe the defense is, we're looking out for other people when this guy is breaking the code of conduct, which at that point is pretty understandable. It's less about that given relationship and more about this guy. Does he not know how to act in the orbit of tours? And, you know, judging by the reports, it seems that maybe he doesn't.
In terms of suspending him, right? In other sports, right? They're not allowed in the facility. It's pretty easy to control. They get fined if they break those rules. Is this guy not allowed to buy tickets to like WT events now? Like, can he buy a front row seat and be yelling at her from there and not get kicked out? Like, can you walk us through, since it is a bunch of independent contractors, but obviously WTA and ITF, they all have coaching certifications and all these processes. What is the real impact of the suspension on him? And what is the ability for him not to be able to participate?
There's some history here. I would encourage everyone to see this Elena Rybakina movie about her father. This is 20 some years ago. There was another coach, Joe Giuliano, who was a former player of some repute who was banned for life. And there were pictures of them on the gates by the ticket office at the tournament security guard. They were not allowed on the grounds. And I think, Andy, you raised a really good point, which is if the WTA is a workforce and this is a workplace, there is an obligation to protect everyone. So if we have deemed this figure dangerous and unworthy of being on site, that isn't just about a one-on-one relationship with a player. This is someone who shouldn't be on the premises. So yeah, this guy, I mean, it is not inconceivable that right now there are pictures of Vukov that they have at the ticket office and at the turnstiles and that the security guards have saying, if you see this guy, he's not allowed to be here. So no, he can't be in the front row yelling. He's not allowed on site. And I think in Australia, again, this is according to the reporting, he was there and they shared a hotel room, but he wasn't allowed on the premises. So, I mean, the whole thing is just, it's really disturbing. I think Portia Archer, the new CEO of the WTA, who came from the WNBA, which is a different dynamic with athlete and management, I think that's a relevant part of this. I think she looked at this and said, look, I don't care about independent contracting. This is just wrong, and we've got to find the language to support us. But yeah, it's a disturbing fact pattern, and it's a little strange. It's a good question, Mike, because it's a little strange in Australia. Let me get this straight. Like, he wasn't allowed to sit there and watch your matches, but then after the match, you guys were sharing a hotel room?
That's just about jurisdiction, though, really.
Business.
I mean, that's essentially what we're talking about. It's just jurisdiction. We can control this part of it. We can't control that part of it. And it's pretty clear, right? I mean, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, it's super weird. And it needs to be said, at the end of all of this, we can have our opinions. They don't really matter that much. They don't affect the situation at all. You just hope that she is happy, she is clear-headed, she is making these decisions for herself. There's not some other control mechanism going on, because Elena Rybakina is phenomenal. She's so good. She's so good. And, it's like this weird swagger where she'll win a match and like barely fist pump. She won Wimbledon and it was expected. It's crazy. There's something really cool there. This big, tall athlete who can move the way she does and strikes the ball so smoothly. So that's what we want to be talking about with her is like, okay, she's 5 or 6 in the world now. Bjorn Fratangelo said this, she's in the conversation for number 1 if she figures it all out. He was effusive about how good she is and how hard she is to game plan for. So at the end of the day, that's what we want to be focusing on, not this circus show of a dude who, is inserting himself into the conversation. Like, I don't know, if you're with someone, right, and you care about that person and they have one of the best coaches in the world agreeing to work with them, it's kind of selfish to put yourself in the middle of all that and have proximity and putting this out and making yourself part of the story, especially before there's a ruling of any way, shape, or form. Like, there has to be an element of self-control here. I mean, is that out of bounds, JW?
No, I mean, I think this is a glimpse into dysfunction, and this is a glimpse into the world that some of these athletes live in that sometimes seems divorced from what is, well-adjusted normal human contact. It's a really disturbing set of facts, and I think, again, I think everyone's sort of parsing their words in part because the player herself is not buying any of this. But I think you look at this from a distance objectively, and it's pretty hard not to conclude this is a really problematic, dysfunctional relationship, abusive, again, by any definition I would use. People have asked me the same things. This is a Wimbledon champion. I'm like, you know what, though? If she were ranked 98 and couldn't break a glass, it doesn't necessarily make it less disturbing. But I do think the fact that this is also really taking a toll. When I read that his methods were the reason behind some of these withdrawals. So not only is this disturbing antisocial behavior, but it's actually having a direct impact on her tennis. That's something that really struck me. It's just, I wish we were talking about Denis Shapovalov and the return of the one-handed. This is not a pleasant story to talk about, but I think it's important. And I think the WTA really set a precedent here. And you just hope that Rybakina emerges from this okay, and you hope that this is a deterrent in the future.
Yeah, that's the number one thing. You hope that it doesn't take her looking back 10 or 15 years from now and going, that was a mistake. That's not what we want. She's an otherworld talent. Like you said, that doesn't make you immune to the human nature of Earth, right? And the good, the bad, whatever it may be. You just can hope this ends positively in some way, shape, or form. The investigation was not a good look. And to your point, we were scared to talk about it because of what we didn't know. Now there's detail, now there's proof, now there's context. So we have to chat about it a little bit more. Wish we weren't talking about this, but JW, thanks for checking in. Thank all of you for watching Quick Serve.